Today we are talking about human sacrifice in the Bible and how it reveals that God is the devil. You see, people don't really realize that there are so many atrocities and violence in the Old Testament regarding animal sacrifice and human sacrifice. And there were many sects of Christianity throughout the ages, like the Gnostics, the Marcions, and the Cathars, who viewed this scripture and saw all this violence and death and destruction and concluded that the God of the Bible is actually Satan. So that's what we're taking a look at today. And not only that, but we're going to see how Christianity itself is founded on human sacrifice. All of this really revolves around human sacrifice. People don't really realize this. This is what we're taking a look at today. It's going to be good. Now, we're going to get started right away, but as always, before we do, please hit like and subscribe. Why? Because my channel is about getting this information out there so that people can break free from dogmatic religion and that we can raise the consciousness of humanity and create a better world. And when you hit like, it actually just tells the algorithm to show this to more people, and it helps raise consciousness. So it takes just a second, but please do it right now. Tap the like button, sacrifice it to the gods of the algorithm to appease them. Also, let's see my new book. Remember, it comes out May 16th. It's called Neogenesis, Dawn of the New Mind. So look forward to that. Mark your calendars. Also, I want to remind you, if you enjoy my work and you want to support and help me create bigger and better content, support over on patreon.com/MorgueOfficial. You'll get access to all of our members only videos. We're having a members only video right after this stream. It's going to be a good one. We're talking about the 10 ways that you can tell that you are more intelligent than the average person and how intelligence relates to higher consciousness. That's going to be good if you want to be a part of that. Get access to all of our members only videos. There's a new one every week. You can support at any tier on Patreon or tier 2 or higher here on YouTube by hitting the join button right below this. And last but not least, if you have a Spotify account, check me out on Spotify. I have these videos on there as a podcast called Dawn of the New Earth. So look up Dawn of the New Earth on Spotify. Give me a follow over there. You'll find all these videos, and it's a great place to check them out. All right, my friends, here we go. We're talking about human sacrifice in the Bible. This is really important. We just talked a little bit before about how Lucifer is not Satan, and we understood that these were different types, different archetypes. They stood for opposite things. Now, we're taking a look how God is actually Satan. God is the devil. And this is not just an idea that I'm, pulling out of my back pocket. This is something that has been thought throughout the ages by many Christians. Of course, Christians considered them heretics and tried to eradicate them, but the Gnostics believed that the God of the Old Testament was actually the devil himself. Marcion was the creator of the world's first Christian canon, meaning the first Bible. And he believed that the Old Testament God was the devil. That's why he left out all of the scriptures associated with what we now know as the Old Testament out of the first Bible, because he believed that that was a satanic being and that those were satanic scriptures. Same thing with the Cathars. When we turn to the medieval times, the Cathars also believed that Satan was the creator of these old violent scriptures, and that we were actually fallen angels tricked by Satan and imprisoned in the material world. Marcion and the Gnostics had similar beliefs as well, and they saw Jesus Christ as being from a different God altogether. So we're going to take a look at these different ideas of human sacrifice, instances of human sacrifice in the Bible. I grew up in a strict religious Christian household. I used to be a Christian, so I'm familiar with a lot of these stories, but I know a lot of people don't realize that there actually is human sacrifice in the Bible. It's important to understand this and realize that, this is why the Gnostics looked at this being and said, hey, you know what? This is not God. This is the devil. This is Satan. They called him Yaldabaoth. They had many different names for him. Yaldabaoth was one of them. Another one was Nebro, the rebel, Saklas, the fool, and Samael, the blind god. So they looked at the God of the Bible as being this evil being, the rebel, the fool, the blind god, the creator of a material prison planet to essentially torture souls. And so this is what we're exploring today. But I also want to emphasize something else that's very important about this, and this has to do with Christianity and the New Testament. Because, a lot of the human sacrifice we're talking about has to do with the Old Testament and the Old Testament God. But we have to look at the modern interpretation of Christianity as well. The Gnostic interpretation of Christianity and Marcion and all these different sects, they essentially looked at Jesus as not being the son of the God of the Bible, but being the divine spark of the one true God, a being of divine light, which we all are a part of, and that we need to realize by looking within, achieving gnosis or knowledge, and realizing that we are sparks of the divine and liberating ourselves from this cycle of reincarnation into the material world. And they believed that Jesus was a messenger here to help us gain knowledge, not forgiveness of sins or worshiping him, but about looking within and achieving gnosis, achieving knowledge, and realizing that we are all divine. That's why in the Gospel of Thomas, Jesus says, know thyself, or look within, know who you are, and you will know that you are sons of the living Father. But modern Christianity, of course, interpreted Jesus Christ completely different, and it's all about sin and salvation. And here is why Christianity is actually founded on the idea of human sacrifice. So before, and remember, I grew up in a strict Christian household. I was a Christian for a while. This is what one is taught in modern Christianity. So according to modern Christianity, fundamentalist Christianity, before Jesus came around, if one wanted to be forgiven of their sins, they often had to provide a sacrifice. And this was often in terms of an animal sacrifice. So essentially, if you were sinful, you would, place your sins on the animal sacrifice, on the animal, and sacrifice that animal to God, and that would cleanse you of your sins. And you would have to do this all the time because, you would sin all the time. So you would have to keep making sacrifices to God. First of all, realize how sick and crazy that is. Imagine if we were doing that today, that would be absolutely horrifying. But I want you now to think about the New Testament when Jesus Christ came along. So the whole idea in terms of modern Christianity is that Jesus Christ became the ultimate sacrifice, so to speak. That instead of sacrificing an animal, Jesus Christ was sacrificed, and he took on all the sins of the world. All the sins that will ever be committed, have been committed, he took them on, and he was sacrificed, and that is how we became cleansed of our sins through the sacrifice of Jesus Christ. Now, I just want you to stop for a minute and really think about how crazy of an idea that is, and how kind of sick of an idea that is. We get so numb to hearing about these religious ideas because we hear about them every day. They become common. But think about if we never heard about that before, this idea that this God sent his son to be tortured and sacrificed to him to take on the sins of the world. It's just an insane idea. And this is why we have to realize that even modern Christianity is founded on the idea of human sacrifice, which is not a really great thing to be founded on. So I'm kind of digressing here, but let's actually take a look. Let's actually look in the Bible and find these instances of human sacrifice and really examine them and see what they are about. And to be able to do this, there's this great article over on medium.com, and it's written by Religion and Politics at the Dinner Table. I like Religion and Politics at the Dinner Table. They post some good articles, and it's called Human Sacrifices in the Bible. The Christian God Only Accepts Payment in Blood. So I'm going to read some excerpts from that article because he has compiled some really good verses for us to look at. So that being said, if you like what you hear today, well, I hope you don't like what you hear in terms of the sacrifices, but if you like the content, if you find it informative, then go give Religion and Politics at the Dinner Table a follow over on medium.com, and you'll be able to read the whole article there for yourself. So it starts off by saying, growing up in church, I'd hear the stories from the Old Testament about God demanding various sacrifices and burnt offerings. And the pastor normally rattled this off with enough charisma that it didn't raise much interest in me. And that's the amazing thing, the nefarious thing about Christianity is that there are so many red flags, but you become so brainwashed and numb to it. And yeah, in talking about, the love of Jesus Christ and being kind to one another, the pastor will throw in some crazy stuff about blood sacrifices and you just kind of, you hear it so much and it just kind of like, oh yeah, okay, I guess that's just part of it, and it doesn't really trigger any warning signs for a lot of people. And that's very, very true. It's very nefarious how all these ideas are quite deranged, but get taken as normal for some reason. So that's the power of brainwashing. Now, so the author here says, I just imagined that they burned a portion of their food, or as I got older, I realized they would kill a sheep or other animals, like in the instance of Abraham and Isaac's story, which is one of the stories that began to pull at the thread of my doubt about the Bible. By the way, if you're familiar with the story of Cain and Abel, where, it's like the first murder, Cain kills Abel. Why does Cain kill Abel? Cain, for those who don't know, Cain and Abel, I'm sure most people know, Cain and Abel are the sons of Adam and Eve. And it's considered the first murder when Cain killed Abel. Well, why did Cain kill Abel? Because Cain was jealous because God accepted his sacrifice, but rejected Cain's sacrifice, accepted Abel's sacrifice and rejected Cain's sacrifice. But here's the interesting thing. So Abel was a farmer and raised sheep. That's what he did. He raised sheep, he raised animals. And Cain worked with vegetables. Cain was a farmer and worked with vegetables, grew crops. So Abel took care of the animals. Cain grew the crops, grew the vegetables. Well, when it came to make sacrifices to the Lord, which is just a weird concept to begin with, Cain sacrificed an animal, a sheep. Or I'm sorry, did I say Cain? Abel sacrificed an animal, a sheep, and Cain presented his crops to the Lord. And God accepted Abel's sacrifice of an animal and rejected the vegetable sacrifice. So it just goes to show you, even right from the beginning, this should really raise red flags. An all-loving God, first of all, isn't one that accepts sacrifices to begin with. That's just a really weird and screwed up idea. And then to reject the more pacifist offering of crops and vegetables and only accept the, death of a living being is also extremely screwed up and should be throwing up red flags. So right there from the beginning, you have some very major red flags in the Bible. And this is where, the Gnostics and the Cathars and Marcion start going, okay, things are not adding up here. This being is not acting like a God, loving God. And when you look at the history as well of how the Bible was created and how Christianity rose, the religion that Christianity was based on and that the Bible was based on originally was not a monotheism. It was, it had many gods. It was polytheistic. There was El Elyon, there was Asherah, there was Baal, there was many different gods. Yahweh was a war god. And as time went on, people began to adopt Yahweh as being the strongest God, the most powerful God. And so then it became a henotheism. A henotheism is when there's multiple gods, but there is one that is more powerful than all the rest. So Yahweh became the most powerful God. But then as time went by, it morphed from a henotheism to a monotheism when Yahweh declared, I am the one true God. There is no other God but me. And then that's when he declared himself to be God, and it became a monotheism. And he sort of absorbed all the all the different attributes of all the other gods, like El Elyon, and he kind of absorbed those properties, but he retained his properties as a war god as well. So when you understand that and think about it, it becomes a lot more clear why the Old Testament is so destructive and bloody, because it became associated with a war god. Now, that's not the only reason, but there are a lot of red flags. And when you look at the context, this stuff starts to make sense. So the author continues here by saying, then there's the case of the firstborn of Egypt being killed by God, when God requires the Israelites to wipe their doorsills with blood to get the angel of death that God has sent to pass over their homes. During this section of the Bible, God even turns the Nile River into blood. So if you've ever heard the story of the plagues of Egypt, where God sends the plagues on Egypt, the final plague is the death of every firstborn son, except for those who God said, hey, if you don't want this, God told his people, God told his people to put, he told the Israelites to wipe blood on their door, and then the angel of death would pass over. That's why it's called, for those who don't know, by the way, that's why it's called Passover. Passover is celebrating when the angel of death passed over those households and didn't kill the firstborn. Excuse me if I'm, my pace is a little off. I have to choose my words very carefully on YouTube when I talk about these things. And sometimes it's a little difficult to dance around words. It's silly, but that's what you have to do when you do these things. But that's why, so if you didn't know, that's why it's called Passover. But yeah, God killed all the firstborn children in Egypt. And not just of the humans, but of the animals as well. And so again, if you really think about that, does that sound like a God of love to you? All of these innocent children dying, innocent animals dying. Why would you kill the firstborn of the? It's just a bloody mess. So that's also a big red flag. And you can see, we haven't even gotten to the human sacrifice part yet, but you can see where the Gnostics, the Cathars, and the Marcionites, they were all looking at this and being like, hey, this is not a good being. And when you contrast to Jesus, you see that Jesus Christ is the opposite of all this. Jesus Christ preaches love and acceptance and hangs out with sinners, and actually went to the place where they would sell, right? The marketplace, they would sell animals for sacrifices. So you would go to the marketplace, you'd buy an animal, and then you would sacrifice it to atone for your sins. Jesus went in there and he kicked over all the money tables, and he chased the people out with whips. I think it's been a while since I read it, but he chased them out with whips because he was like, this is, he was very much against that kind of thing. So Jesus Christ was the complete opposite of the Old Testament God. This is why the Gnostics and the Marcions and the Cathars were like, hey, Jesus Christ is not the son of this evil being, this devil. Jesus is from another God. And we are all actually, according to the Gnostics, from that God. We are all divine beings. We are all the same thing that Jesus is. We just have to realize it. And that's basically what Jesus's message was like, hey, realize that you are like me. And we are all sons of the living Father. Not to, put a gender connotation on it. I'm just quoting what it says in the Gospel of Thomas. We are all children of the one divine mind. And by children, I mean pieces. So anyway, let's continue here because we haven't even gotten to the human sacrifice. So let's talk about the story, first of all, of Abraham and Isaac, because if you are familiar with the idea of human sacrifice in the Bible, this is probably the one that most people are familiar with. So let's start off with this one right away. And we are going to, this is a quote from the Bible itself. This is in Genesis 22. Okay, so in Genesis 22, it says, and he said, now take thy son, thine only son Isaac, whom thou loves, and get thee into the land of Moriah, and offer him there for a burnt offering upon one of the mountains, which I will tell thee. So he's saying, hey, Abraham, take your son, your only son, the son you love, and go to the land of Moriah, go up one of the mountains, and offer your son as a burnt offering to me. And Isaac spoke unto Abraham his father and said, my father. And he said, here I am, my son. And he said, behold the fire and wood, but where is the lamb for a burnt offering? So this is really screwed up. Abraham and Isaac go up this mountain, and Abraham starts setting up the altar, the fire, setting up the wood and the altar. And Isaac is going, hey, Dad, I see you're setting up, this altar for a burnt offering, but we don't have an animal. Where's the lamb? What are we sacrificing here? So screwed up. And Abraham said, son, my God will provide himself a lamb for a burnt offering. So they went both of them together. So basically Abraham lied to his son. Abraham said, oh, don't worry. God's going to make a lamb appear and we'll use that one. So it's such a screwed up story. And by the way, this stuff always triggers me. Like I said, I have RTS, religious trauma syndrome, and I actually have a very bad experience with this story. I'm not going to get into it, but I maybe at some point I'll talk about it. But I don't want to talk about it now. But just to be known, I had a very bad experience related to this story. So anyway, it's very screwed up. Anyway. And they came to the place which God had told him of, and Abraham built an altar there and laid the wood in order and bound Isaac his son and laid him on the altar upon the wood. So clearly Isaac must be kind of getting a hint as to what's going on because his dad ties him up and puts him on the altar. And Abraham stretched forth his hand and took the knife to slay his son. So he gets the knife, he raises it up, and he's ready to unalive his son. And the angel of the Lord called unto him out of heaven and said, Abraham. And Abraham said, here am I. And he said, lay not thine hand upon the lad, neither do thou anything unto him. For now I know that thou fearest God, seeing thou hast not withheld thy son, thine only son from me. And Abraham lifted up his eyes and looked, and behold, behind him a ram caught in a thicket by his horns. And Abraham went and took the ram and offered him up for a burnt offering instead of his son. Okay, so here's what's happened, is that he's getting ready to kill his son. He raises the knife to kill his son. And an angel of the Lord comes down and says, hey, Abraham, stop it. I see now that you fear the Lord and you are ready to unalive your son for me. And he's like, you know what? Don't worry about it. Here's a ram, and God provides a ram for the burnt offering instead. Okay, so there's a couple things to unpack here. So first of all, yes, human sacrifice didn't actually occur. God stopped it from happening. But one has to think about how, first of all, there's a lot to unpack here. First of all, think about how screwed up this story is that you are testing someone by having them murder their only child to prove their fear of you. And this is the most, this is not a God of love. This is the most abusive sort of relationship that you could imagine. And it would be one thing to, look at this story as a one-off sort of instance. But the idea here is that even though human sacrifice didn't actually end up occurring, this story in the Bible is taught as like the pinnacle, the archetypal story illustrating the type of faith that we are supposed to have as Christians. So in other words, in Christianity, they use this story and say, Abraham was such a great person for believing in God so much that he was going to kill his kid. And we should all be like Abraham. We should all do that. So that's absurd. And that's an important part that I want to get across, is that even though human sacrifice didn't occur, this is looked at as the example that we should all behave, that we should all strive for. I don't know about you, but if you have a voice in your head telling you to off one of your children, maybe that's not the best idea. Maybe you should go see a therapist. Maybe you should go see a psychiatrist, not use it as an example of ultimate faith. But that being said, because there are Christians who will go, oh, but God didn't actually let him go through with it. Well, first of all, it's screwed up in a number of ways. It's ridiculous. This is taught as a positive message. And finally, it doesn't nullify the fact that God accepts sacrifices elsewhere. So first of all, he killed all the firstborn children. So this shows that God doesn't have a problem with offing people. He kills all the firstborn children in Egypt. In the flood, he drowns the entire world. And people don't think about how screwed up that is. He drowns the entire world except for Noah and his family. And think about how screwed up that is, because this is taught to children. There are little children picture books that you can get to teach your little 3-year-old about the flow of Noah's Ark and the flood and the animals. And it's such a cute, happy story. Excuse me. This is the drowning of all life on earth, except for Noah, his family, and the animals on the ark. This includes innocent children, pregnant women, animals that have done nothing wrong. Like, think about how bloodthirsty and just what an atrocity this is. So there's that. There's all these, and then of course there's the story of Job as well, where Job allows Satan to, it's been a while since I read the story of Job, but God wanted to test Job's faith. And Satan went to God and said, hey, Job only serves you because you give him a good life. And so God was like, okay, go do whatever you want to test him. And so God allows Satan to basically torture him. He gets sick. His health gets terrible. And if I remember correctly, I think they have his wife and all his kids die. I think his wife and all his kids get killed. Just to test his faith, because he stayed faithful to the Lord. And God gave him a new wife and new kids later, but I mean, is that really, these aren't really things you can just replace. It's not property. It's not like, oh, sorry, I offed all your children. Here's some new ones. Oh, wow, great. Thank you. No, you're going to miss your kids that you were slaughtered. Anyway, ridiculous. But let's actually dive into more instances of sacrifice here. So I want to see that. So here's a really important one. And this is the story of Jephthah's daughter. And so in the story of Jephthah's daughter, we have God accepting a burnt virgin sacrifice. And I talk about this one a lot because it's so astounding to me. Like, you could not get more archetypally satanic than accepting a burnt virgin sacrifice. That's like something you would watch from a 70s movie on a satanic ritual, a 70s horror movie on a satanic ritual. They'd be offering what? Burnt virgin sacrifice. That's like the archetypal example of a satanic offering. Yet it happens here in the Bible, and God accepts a burnt virgin sacrifice. So, and you can start to see why the Gnostics and the Cathars and Marcion went, hey, maybe this God's not such a great God. So let's read this. This is in Judges 11:29. Then the Spirit of the Lord came upon Jephthah, and he passed over Gilead. And Jephthah vowed a vow unto the Lord, and said, if thou shalt without fail deliver the children of Ammon into mine hands, then it shall be that whatsoever comes forth from the doors of my house to meet me, when I return in peace from the children of Ammon, shall surely be the Lord's, and I will offer it up for a burnt offering. So basically he's saying, hey, God, if you give me success in battle, if you allow me to triumph over my enemies, then when I come home from battle, triumphant, whatever comes out of the door to my house to greet me, I will offer that as a burnt sacrifice to you. So, first of all, again, just think about how crazy that is. And I really want you to take a step back and think about how we hear, again, like I said before, we hear about these things over and over and over again. And Christianity has been so common that we don't really think twice about it. Think about how crazy that a God of love is supposedly doing this. Now, if you remember that Yahweh is actually a war God, doesn't this make a lot more sense? Hey, if you allow me, war God, to defeat my enemies in battle, then I will make a blood sacrifice to you. Yeah, bloody war God, that fits perfectly. Does it fit perfectly with an all-loving God? Not really. Does it fit with the teachings of Jesus in the New Testament? Not really. So anyway, and for those, by the way, who are wondering why Jephthah said, whatever will come meet me from my door to offer as a burnt sacrifice. Jephthah was most likely thinking it would be an animal of some kind, like his pet dog would run out to meet him, or his favorite sheep or something. I don't know. He was expecting an animal of some kind to come out and meet him. So anyway, Jephthah goes out and is triumphant. He conquers and he went back home. And it says, and Jephthah came to Mizpah unto his house. So he went back home. And behold, his daughter came out to meet him with timbrels and with dances, and she was his only child. Besides her, he had neither son nor daughter. So her daughter comes dancing out, so happy to see her dad. It's her only child, his only child, comes dancing to meet her dad. And it came to pass when he saw her that he rent his clothes and said, Alas, my daughter, thou hast brought me very low, and thou art one of them that trouble me, for I have opened my mouth unto the Lord, and I cannot go back. So he got very sad, and he tore his clothes. They do that a lot in the Bible. When they get very sad, they tear their clothes. So he got very sad. He tore his clothes and said, this is a horrible thing that's happened. I made a promise to the Lord, and I can't take it back. And his daughter said to him, My father, if thou hast opened thy mouth unto the Lord, do to me according that which hath proceeded out of thy mouth. For as much as the Lord hath taken vengeance for thee of thine enemies, even of the children of Ammon. So she said basically like, hey, God clearly allowed you to be triumphant in your battle, so do to me whatever you told God that you were going to do to me. And she said unto her father, Let this thing be done for me. Let me alone 2 months, that I may go up and down the mountains and bewail my virginity, I and my fellows. And he said, Go, and sent her away for 2 months, and she went with her companions and bewailed her virginity upon the mountains. So basically she said this, hey, you can do this to me, but first, at least let me go for 2 months in the mountains with my friends and mourn the fact that I'm going to die a virgin, basically. And it came to pass at the end of the 2 months that she returned to her father, who did with her according to his vow, which he had vowed. And she knew no man, and it was a custom in Israel. Then the daughters of Israel went yearly to lament the daughter of Jephthah, the Gileadite, 4 days in a year. All right, there's, again, a lot to unpack in this story. First of all, think about how horrible this is. I mean, it really makes me sick even talking about it. I don't know if that's just me because I have RTS, or maybe you can relate to it as well, but it makes me feel ill discussing it, because it's such a sick story. You have this story about a guy and his daughter is so happy to see him, and she comes dancing out, and he's like, hey, I'm going to offer you as a burnt sacrifice. And so he does. And so anyone who's like, who points to the story of Isaac and Jacob, or not, sorry, Abraham and Isaac, right? Story of Abraham and Isaac. They go, oh, well, look, God in the end stopped Abraham from doing it. Okay, well, what about the story of Jephthah? He didn't stop Jephthah. Jephthah, he accepted a burnt virgin sacrifice from Jephthah. So just think about how incredibly screwed up that is. Now, I will say there are some Christians who claim that, oh, he didn't actually sacrifice her as a burnt offering. He just made it so that she could never marry and would always be a virgin. So that's what some Christians try and say. Oh, no, he didn't actually offer as a burnt offering. It was just that she would never be able to, that she would always be a virgin. First of all, that's a very big stretch. That doesn't make any sense, because the vow that he made to God was a burnt offering, and it said that he did what he promised to God, and it says that the daughters of Israel went yearly to mourn for Jephthah's daughter. So that doesn't make any sense. Now, even if it did, that would still be a screwed up thing to do. Like that would still be a weird, even if it was that, oh, well, you have to be a virgin now for the rest of your life, that would still be a really weird, sick, twisted thing to do. But I think that that's a very far stretch of the imagination. I just read for you literally what the Bible says, and it's very clear what happened. It's right there in black and white. So, and again, even if it didn't, there's so much more, when you look at the story of God drowning the entire world, having the firstborn children of Egypt killed, having Job's children killed. Clearly, God does not have a problem with this occurring. You have to choose my words very carefully. It's frustrating, but you can see what I mean here. So we have here in Jephthah's daughter, this story, a burnt virgin sacrifice. And you can, how could you get more satanic than that? Try and think of a more satanic, that's the epitome of what is usually like a stereotypical satanic act. And this is exactly why the Gnostics, the Marcions, and the Cathars went, this is not a good God. This is not a loving God. This is an evil, satanic being. And I want to remind you that I don't believe that this God actually exists. I don't believe that Satan or God exist in terms of how the Bible describes them. But I believe that these are archetypes. These are symbols for different patterns in existence. And the being that is described in the Bible, in the story of the Bible, the being that is the God of the Old Testament, fits the archetype or symbol of Satan. His properties, his characteristics, his actions match exactly 100% the characteristics of the Satan archetype, the archetype of dominance, control, power, and this manipulation of archetypes and symbolism is what allows the church to have so much power. When they make this being of darkness into something to be praised, so that you have submissive, obedient individuals, and then you associate symbolism of Lucifer with knowledge and wisdom and understanding and light as being evil, then you make off limits what would free you, and you create a structure of fear ruled by a satanic archetype masquerading as God. This is why this is so important, because symbols and archetypes are used for the manipulation of consciousness, and it has been done so to an extreme degree in Christianity. Let's take a look at another passage from the Bible. I haven't read this one yet, so I'm curious to see. Let's see what this one is. This is from Leviticus 27, 28 through 29. Notwithstanding no devoted thing that a man shall devote unto the Lord of all that he hath, both of man and beast, and of the field of his possession, shall be sold or redeemed. Every devoted thing is most holy unto the Lord. None devoted, which shall be devoted of men, shall be redeemed, but shall surely be put to death. So now, the author of this article writes, the word devoted here is a translation from the Hebrew word cherem, which signified a type of offering that meant they were subject to complete destruction as a part of divine command. This included human beings. Keep in mind in this next verse. Thou shalt not delay to offer the first of thy ripe fruits and of thy liquors, the firstborn of thy sons shalt thou give unto me. This is in Exodus 22 through 29. Exodus 22, 29. So the author says there's debate on exactly what this verse means. Some who try to claim that the Israelites didn't perform human sacrifices claim that this was just a dedication of the firstborn. If that was the case, then why include humans in with all of the other things that were obviously for burnt offering? Also, given what Abraham was prepared to do and what Jephthah carried through with, it would make sense if this sort of practice wasn't unheard of or even somewhat common. And that makes a lot of sense. So basically he's saying there's debate on what this means, in that you shall offer up the firstborn of thy sons. Some people say that it means, oh, well, you're just dedicating them to the Lord. But the author is saying, well, then why would you put it in with a list of all the other things that are going to be offered up for burnt sacrifices? And then he points out, as we can see in the case with Abraham and Isaac and Jephthah, it may have been the case that this wasn't something that was unheard of, that it happened sometimes. Here's another one. This is also one that I have not read yet, so let's see what it is. This is in 1 Kings 13. It says, "And behold, there came a man of God out of Judah, a priest, by the word of the Lord unto Bethel. And Jeroboam stood by the altar to burn incense. And he cried against the altar in the word of the Lord, and said, O altar, altar, thou saith the Lord, behold, a child shall be born unto the house of David, Josiah by name, and upon thee shall he offer the priests of the high places that burn incense upon thee, and men's bones shall be burnt upon thee." Wow. I don't recall that verse. That's one that's, I mean, I've read the entire Bible, but this was a very long time ago, and I probably just skimmed past this. I mean, I read this when I was probably like, I don't know, 9 or 10 years old or something, which is a crazy thing to be having. People are so, there's all these people doing book bans. The Bible should be banned. If you're going to talk about book banning, like, oh, children shouldn't be exposed to such and such, the Bible should be if that's your position, the Bible should be the first book that's banned. There's violence and murder and incest and all kinds of perversion. It's really bad. Anyway, 2 Kings 23:20, "And he slew all the priests of the high places that were there upon the altars, and burned men's bones upon them, and returned to Jerusalem." He killed all the priests and burned their bones upon them. And the author says, David's son Josiah starts a purge, killing all the priests of the old religion and burning their bodies on top of the altars that had been used for other gods. All of this was evidently right in the sight of the Lord, if we're to believe the next verse. So David's son, and David was king, so David's son's Josiah starts killing all the priests of the religions that didn't serve, their God, and burned their bodies on top of the altars. Does that sound like a loving, compassionate God to you, or does that sound like a bloody, devilish, satanic war God? Let's see. This is in 2 Chronicles 34, 1-5. This is continuing to talk about Josiah. Josiah was 8 years old when he began to reign, and he reigned in Jerusalem 31 years. And he did that which was right in the sight of the Lord, and walked in the ways of David his father, and declined neither to the right hand nor to the left. And in the 12th year, he began to purge Judah and Jerusalem from the high places and the groves and the carved images and the molten images. And they break down the altars of Baalim in his presence, and the images that were on high above, he cut them down, and the groves and the carved images and the molten images he broke in pieces, and made dust of them, and strode it upon the graves of them that had sacrificed unto them. And he burnt the bones of the priests upon their altars, and cleansed Judah and Jerusalem. Anyway, so Josiah, David's son, goes in and starts basically just destroying everything, destroying all the statues, destroying the carved images, destroying the groves, grinding them into dust, and burnt the bones of the priests upon the altars, and cleansed Judah and Jerusalem. So just a total bloodbath, basically, and more human sacrifice. And the author says, this to me is more evidence of the God of the Old Testament being in approval of burnt human sacrifice. If this was just a religious reform, he could have repurposed, exiled, or even executed the priests of the old religion. But for him to kill them and burn them on the altar indicates they were an offering to his God. So let's see, there's some more here. That's the thing with the Bible. It's not like, just one or two things. It is filled to the brim with these kinds of atrocities. There's just a lot. I'm trying to see which are some of which ones we want to read here. So here David is king of Israel during a famine that God has sent due to the previous king Saul breaking a treaty. Let's see here. Let's take a look, and it says continuation into Christianity. There's a lot more examples, but they're basically all the same. I think you get the picture of the fact that God doesn't have a problem with offing people or having people offed for the most ridiculous of reasons and accepting burnt sacrifices. So let's read this. This is interesting. It says, the evidence that, this is the author speaking again, the evidence I'm seeing is that God wants blood. It seems to be the only thing that satiates him. In most cases, it's a regular stream of animal blood in war, but he also at times demands humans, including children. Yeah, that's exactly right. I mean, it's a very common theme. There's, just go read the Old Testament if you want. It's filled with all the words that you can think of that I cannot say on live streaming. All of the most terrible things you can think of. It's filled with that. And not just filled with that, but approved or commanded by God. It's not like, oh, it just happens and, oh, that was really sad that this happened and, oh, that was sinful that they did this. No, it's approved or commanded by God that you off all these people, have burnt sacrifices, take the daughters of the places that you conquer for yourselves, terrible things. And when we get to the New Testament, we see this even plainly stated. For if the blood of bulls and goats and the ashes of a heifer sprinkling the unclean sanctify to the purifying of the flesh, how much more shall the blood of Christ, who through the eternal Spirit offered himself without spot to God, purge your consciousness from dead works to serve the living God? So this is what I was talking about before, how Christianity, how it's interpreted in fundamentalist Christianity, not the Cathars, not the Gnostics, not the Marcions, but what became like fundamentalist Christianity. They saw Jesus Christ as being the ultimate sacrifice. And that's what they're saying. Hey, if the blood of bulls and goats and cows purify you of your sin. Again, think about how crazy this is. This was really common. If you were sinful, you'd go sacrifice animals. Don't you think that's kind of satanic? You think if that was happening now, that people would be like, hey, maybe that's not such a good thing to do. Anyway, but the point of this verse is saying, hey, look, if God likes the blood of animals and it cleanses you of your sin, well, how much more shall the blood of Christ purge your sin? And basically saying that if you've ever heard of Jesus described as the spotless lamb, I don't know if you've ever heard of Christ described as the spotless lamb. And this was meant to indicate that he was a sacrifice, because they would often sacrifice lambs. And so Jesus being the spotless lamb meant that Jesus was pure and perfect and the perfect sacrifice. And also think about how gross that is as well. In sacrificing the animals, you were supposed to sacrifice like the purest, like the best, the purest, the most innocent, it's not like you would pick one that was about to die or something, because God would be like, oh, well, that's not good enough. You have to, it's not ringing any alarm bells for people. Maybe there's an issue here. Maybe there's a problem here. That's exactly what the Gnostic says. That's exactly what Marcion, the creator of the first Christian canon, the first Bible, said. It's exactly what the Cathars said. Let's see. For where a testament is, there also must be a necessity of death. So the author says it seems Christians co-opted this entire premise into their religion, with Christ being the ultimate blood sacrifice to God. And I'm glad that the author highlights this, because that's very important. People don't realize that, Christianity is centered on a blood sacrifice to God. And there's just verses that continue to say this, like in Hebrews, by the which will are we sanctified through the offering of the body of Jesus Christ once and for all, but with the precious blood of Christ, as of a lamb without blemish and without spot. Right there you go. That's what I was referring to. Either you've been cleansed by the precious blood of Christ as a lamb without blemish and without spot. You see how crazy this is. Like I said, even the idea of sacrificing a perfect lamb, that's horrible. But sacrificing human beings, including one that's supposed to be the son of God, you see the common theme where Abraham and Isaac, it was a father that was going to unalive his child, and Jephthah unalived his child. Well, you have that mirrored in Christianity as the archetypal core of that system of the God the Father having his son be tortured and sacrificed to him. That's crazy. By the way, the Cathars saw the crucifixion story as interpreted like that as being totally evil. They believed it was metaphorical and represent, Jesus dying and being rising again. They believed it represented reincarnation, but they hated the cross. They hated the cross so much that every time they saw it, they would destroy it. And think about how that makes a little more sense, right? If you take the position of the Gnostics and Marcionites and the Cathars, where Jesus Christ was an enlightened human who was a divine spark of the one true God of light, trying to get other people to look within and realize that they were divine, and then he was murdered. Yeah, they're not going to like the cross very much, because in their view, he wasn't a sacrifice to God to cleanse the world of his sins. That's BS for the Gnostics and the Marcions and the Cathars. It's that you're supposed to have knowledge of what you truly are. And Christ was murdered because the authorities of the time didn't like that idea. And so they hated the cross. They would destroy the cross, the Cathars at least. And it makes a lot of sense too when you think about it. The cross is a torture device. So everyone who's walking around with a cross around their neck, that would be like us walking around with an electric chair around our neck. It's really grim. The whole thing is centered on so much, death and destruction and violence. The author says we're supposed to be impressed by this sacrifice of himself to himself for his blood fetish. Yeah. And if you think about the logic of Christianity, modern Christianity, fundamentalist Christianity, is that Jesus is God. So yeah, Jesus sacrificed himself to himself for his blood fetish. But we're also supposed to ignore the overall narrative of an angry blood god demanding sacrifices to be given to him from animals, children, or even himself as a human. When people talk about various primitive people sacrificing humans so that the rain would come, or that their God wouldn't be displeased with them and prevent the sun from coming up, we shake our heads at how horrendous and primitive these people must have been. Yet somehow this God gets a pass and is considered by millions to be the only true God. Only millions? I thought it was billions. Let me see, actually. How many Christians are there in the world? Christianity has approximately 2.38 billion. 2.38 billion. Not million, 2.38 billion. So anyway, and it says, why is that? I guess because unlike these other primitive, so-called primitive religions, it wasn't exterminated and still has a big, huge influence over the world and politics and events to this day. It's because they gained power. It's because they were at the Council of Nicaea. They all agreed upon what Christianity was going to be. They were backed by the power of the Roman Empire, and they unalived everyone who disagreed with them. Everyone who thought that Jesus was from another God, the one true God. Anyone who thought the God of the Bible was an evil being. Anyone who thought that God was not actually, that Jesus wasn't actually divine. The books were burned, people were exiled, and in many cases, unalived. The Cathars were eradicated in the Crusades. And if you ever heard of the medieval Inquisition, the medieval Inquisition was specifically instituted to continue to root out all the Cathars after the Crusades. So the reason why that it persists today is because of power. They had power, they had control, they had dominance, and they were able to forcefully implement this view. And the author is exactly right. We look at, primitive religions where people would sacrifice human beings to their gods for the rain to come, or for the sun to rise, or to not displease the God. But the exact same things happen again and again and again in the Old Testament, and somehow it gets a pass, and people think about it like, oh, it's no big deal. It's just somehow it's not seen as evil. It just goes right by people's minds. And when you even think about the Eucharist, communion, where you drink the blood and eat the body of Jesus Christ. Like, think about how strange that is. The Cathars thought that was a satanic ritual. The Cathars were like, hey, that's straight up, you're telling me you're drinking blood and eating the flesh of Christ, supposedly? That's satanic. And they thought that was a satanic ritual. And, a lot of Christianity takes that as being metaphorical, but a lot don't. Particularly in Catholicism, it's believed that the bread and wine is literally transformed into the actual blood and body of Christ. And these are, and the thing is that these beliefs have a huge impact on the world. When people are indoctrinated into these religions, it utterly destroys an individual's individuality, their ability to think rationally, unless they're able to break out of it. But brainwashing is so strong, it's extremely difficult for so many. And this spills over into all the blood and war. Look at all the crusades that occurred. Look at what's happening in the world right now. All over the world, you have people, with Christian nationalism losing their rights in America. You have all the wars happening in the Middle East, and all the atrocities happening in Iran. And there's a lot of different things that motivate these atrocities: greed and dominance, and psychopathy, and so many horrible things. But religion is a huge root cause of these as well. And so it's not like, oh, these are just harmless stories. They have been the leading cause of all the war, death, and destruction and division that we have in the world today. So religion must absolutely be transformed. And that's what we propose in the Neogenian system. In the Neogenian, we are about creating a new beginning, a new humanity, a new earth through a new consciousness. And that requires a transformation of religion, where we start to see these stories as being metaphorical and allegorical, and we start taking a positive understanding of them, like understanding, like how the Gnostics saw us all as reflections of the one divine mind. And when we realized our divinity, we would achieve gnosis, and all these different positive ways of looking at it, so we can become united instead of divided. Because mainstream religion does the exact opposite of what a true spiritual relationship should be, which should be to connect you with your divinity and us together. It should bring us together and unlock your personal potential and power and abilities, and help each other to work together to create a better world. Right now, mainstream religion does not do that. It rips your divinity away from you, places it in an external deity that you must worship. It tells you you are a broken, sinful, flawed human being, and sees anyone who is not a part of your religion as an enemy. And you know where that leads. So, these are always kind of difficult topics to talk about because of my experience with religion, but I think that this is incredibly important to get out there and for people to know about, and especially people who might be on the fence about Christianity, and maybe information like this will help liberate them from the brainwashing effects that it has, by really opening their eyes to how horrible these atrocities are, and realizing that the God of the Bible cannot exist. It's a logical impossibility. The God of the Bible is considered to be all-loving, all-powerful, and all-knowing. An all-loving, all-knowing, all-powerful God would never commit the countless atrocities that are recorded in the Bible. And so you can know for a fact that this God doesn't exist because it's a logical impossibility. An all-loving God would not drown the entire world, would not kill all the firstborn, would not accept burnt virgin sacrifices, would not allow his people to pillage and SA and unalive and torture and all these horrible things that occur. Oh, by the way, another thing, I didn't even mention this one, but I've mentioned this story before, but Elisha, I think it was the prophet Elisha, some kids came up and made fun of him because he had a bald head. And so God had some bears come out and maul all the children to death because they made fun of someone for having a bald head. I think there was I forget how many kids died. There was 40 kids. Let me see. "42. 2 bears came out of the woods and mauled 42 of them." So anyway, just pointing out, clearly, this is not the act of a loving God. All these things that we've read about are not acts of a loving God. It's not just unlikely that this God exists. It's impossible that this God exists because it's a logical impossibility. Loving God cannot do these things. It's like saying 2 + 2 = 78. That's something that you can know is false based on the principles that are part of the definitions involved. You can know that 2 + 2 doesn't equal 64. You can know that so you, in the same sort of way, following logic and reason, you can know that this God does not exist, cannot exist, is a logical impossibility. It does not fit the attributes of God. It fits the attributes of the archetype and symbol of Satan. So, as I said, this is important information to get out there. So please hit the like button so that more people will see this and the algorithm will spread this around. I have a lot more videos if you're interested in Gnosticism or the Cathars or any of these things. Check out my playlist and subscribe because we're actually going to be pretty soon probably reading some of the Cathars' secret books, which are extremely interesting. We'll probably be doing that sometime soon. And remember, my book is coming out May 16th. And follow me on Spotify, Dawn of the New Earth. Let's see. Oh yeah, we're having a members only video. So if you want to support me and my channel, then support at patreon.com/MorgueOfficial. At any tier or tier 2 or higher right here on YouTube by hitting the join button below this video, you'll access all our members only videos. There's a new one every single week. And today's topic is really interesting. We're talking about 10 signs that you are more intelligent than the average person. And we're going to see how intelligence connects with higher consciousness as well. So as always, my friends, thank you so much for your support. I appreciate it. I want to shout out some of my top supporters like Renaissance Fairy, Cassidy, Angela, the Halloween Mom, DB, Fashida, Nuselina, Eric Fire, Christopher Smith, Joel Swindler, Luke Nash, Thomas Leto, and Ryan Smith, and everyone else. If I forgot your name, I don't think I did, but if I did forget someone, don't worry, I'll be updating this soon. Anyway, thank you all so much for your support. I appreciate it very much.